going to try to keep this rather informal this evening. It's been 53 years since the start of World War II, and as time goes on and as generations go on, we're going to really start to lose some of the memories. And I think these are memories we really should retain for many, many reasons. That's why I'm particularly looking forward to this program tonight, so we can think back, remember back, hear about stories and things that maybe many of us never knew about in terms of World War II, in terms of how Malverne was during that period of time. We have three guests with us this evening. I'll introduce them just as we go down the line. First, we have Frank Zabatta, who's a member of the OSS, which was an intelligence gathering organization. Really, I think was a precursor of the CIA, which started in 1947. Right. Helen Driscoll is filling in for Kay Begensy, who was unable to make it tonight. And Helen lived right here during the war. Her husband was off fighting in the war. And we have Joe Landers, who didn't live at Malverne at that time, but lives in Malverne now, and he fought, I just want to get this correct, what was the name of your outfit there? 392nd Airborne?
392nd Bomb Group.
Bomb Group, right. He flew during the war. As a matter of fact, he just came back from London, England, over the summer, where they honored that entire crew, those who were left. And he'll be able to tell us a little bit about that tonight. Now, before I let our speakers talk, I'm only going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes, I want to talk a little bit about our Historical Society collection, what we have in terms of World War II. First of all, these will be available later on. I'll leave them on the side for people who may want to come up and look through them. We have 2 full volumes of basically their records of everybody who was in the service in Malverne, who replied to a response by the then village historian in the early 1950s. We don't have any since then. These date back to early 50s and back. And he sent these out, and he would ask the name of the person, what part of the service they were in, mother's, father's name. They're very, very specific. What rank they obtained, if they were injured, if they were killed, it was listed in here. Somebody sent it in for them. And many sent photographs in. We have 2 full volumes. They're in alphabetical order, so maybe somebody may want to look up. What I've done is I've gone through, and I just picked out a couple that were very, very interesting. I want to just talk about for a few minutes. This first one is actually a woman named Florence Adele Kelly. The reason I picked this, she was really, this is not World War II, this is World War I. She enlisted August 21st, 1918, but the thing that caught my attention was this picture, which is a beautiful picture, and it was very unusual in those days to have women in the armed forces, the armed services. And this is the uniform she wore at that time.
Is that the Navy?
She was in the Navy, right? Navy. Okay. And just one or two others I would like to mention.
The mother-in-law.
The mother-in-law. Okay. That's great. Well, maybe as we go on, if you want to talk. As a matter of fact, after the speakers discuss what they have to discuss, we will take some questions or statements from you. There are people who I know who are in the service, who fought in the war, and you're certainly welcome towards the end of the evening to make statements or ask some questions of our speakers. Here's another one, Charles Sebastian Wolfe. He was, what caught my eye, he was in World War I and in World War II, 50 years in the service. All right, he was, let's see if we get some information. He was born, well, this can't be right, it says date of birth 1916. That was probably when he enlisted for World War I. But 50 years in October 1951 in the U.S. Navy. He was in the Mexican campaign, First World War I medal, and won a Second World War I medal. And this, Philip Volker, who lived at 180 Norwood Avenue, this caught my eye because I looked at the date. It said date of birth 1878. Oh my God, that's pretty old. What's it doing in this book? It turned out that he fought in the Spanish-American War, right here from Malverne. It goes way, way back. As we go on, as I read you some of this material, you're going to find out that Malverne was very active during the war. We sent a lot of people overseas. We fought in just about every service and every aspect of the war, and we really, did ourselves proud. I also have a list of, and I think this is fairly complete, we lost 15 people during the war. 15 people who died as a result of World War II were from Malverne. I just want to take a moment just to read the names into the record, since we are doing this with Channel 40, and this will become a permanent part of the record. You have Elliot Dressner, who was at 54 Wright Avenue, Frank Bonanno, 56 Malverne Avenue, Forster Scoboria, 33 Nottingham Road, Ernest Tyson, 24 Roosevelt Avenue, Charles Miles, 14 Prince Court, William Schwarner, 44 St. Thomas Place, Alfred Van Wagner, 132 Dogwood Avenue, Harry Spitzenberg, 253 Rolling Street, Everett Ware, 35 Sydney Avenue, John Schmidt, 211 Sydney Avenue, Charles Telzero, 15 Gates Avenue, Rudy Kubik, 66 Cedar Road, Charles Wolfe, 90 Scarcliffe Drive, and John Sunderman, 76 Driving Park. We probably had a few thousand people who either lived in Malverne at the time or have since lived in Malverne who went and fought during the war. Some of the things that caught my attention as I was going through some of our material, we had a tank that was donated from World War I that used to be where Reese Park is now, near the railroad station. It's no longer there. Why? Because the village decided to donate it during the scrap metal drive in World War II. They needed metal, so we donated the tank, which was a terrific historical memorabilia, but it's more important that the cause had the metal at that time. And I found this interesting bit of facts, saying Malverne was very active as a community during World War II. In 1942, Trustee Timothy Hayes lectured to 350 persons at Lindner Place School on incendiary bombs. Malverne residents collected 2,000 pounds of rubber to donate to the war effort. And Mayor William Harris recruited volunteers for daytime airplane spotters. And believe it or not, at 361 Ocean Avenue, an Army aircraft section took over the house at this particular location and placed searchlights and guns on that property right here in Malverne, right on Ocean Avenue. It was during the war, in preparation for a possible air attack. Now, a little plug here, just on our calendar. This is the original. Oops, sorry. This is the original photo you may recognize from our calendar. And just to read the caption from the calendar for those who haven't received it yet, circa 1941, Malverne trustee Harry Leonhardt, Mayor William Harris, and trustee George Schwanwendel kicked off the opening of Malverne's aluminum collection drive during World War II. Okay, so that's what they were doing. Besides the iron, they were also collecting aluminum, and as you heard, we're collecting rubber. And just one more thing, and then we'll get to our speakers. I found 2 or 3 documents that indicated that as a result of World War II, here in Malverne, we had a dedication of what they called a living war memorial. I like to not read the whole thing, but just some excerpts from it, because I think it'll give you a good idea of what Malverne did during the war. This was on June 24th, 1948. It was the dedication of the Malverne High School War Memorial pipe organ. This organ actually was in Herbert Middle School in the auditorium. When they built it, it was actually placed right into the walls. The architect knew this was in the plans and put it right in. There are remnants of the organ left in the school, but basically it's no longer there. And it was an address given by Dr. Howard T. Herber, who was, at that time was the superintendent of the school. Men have always sought to honor heroes. In all ages, they have looked for some means of paying tribute to those who served in battle. This was done by the erection of mounds, pillars, tombs, and other structures capable of defying the destroying power of time. On a nationwide basis, this spirit led to the development of the arch in the column. Witness the Washington Arch in New York, the Arch of Peace in Milan, and the Soldiers and Sailors Arch in Brooklyn. There are also hospitals, chapels, homes, churches, and libraries dedicated as memorials, like the Crimean Memorial Church in Constantinople and the Memorial Hall at Harvard University. Tonight, we honor those of our young men and women who served their country well. During World War II, over 700 of our boys and girls were in the military service. We want to preserve the memory of their lives and deeds by this Aeolian organ. Malverne High School is one of the first schools to complete a war memorial. It is fitting and proper that this memorial should be placed within the school that they learn to love. Now, he said 700 people who had graduated. Then the world gradually drifted towards war, I'm skipping ahead, and finally our nation was pulled into the tide. It was an awful thing to bring this peace-loving but freedom-loving people into a war. The older generation began to wonder if the young men and women were patriotic, if they had the physical stamina to withstand the rigors of combat, if they loved freedom enough to fight and, if necessary, to die for its preservation. The answers to these questions came promptly and definitely. Graduates and former students enlisted in the various branches of military work. The selective service called others. Even some of the high school students laid aside their books and went off to war. Students in our high school began to concentrate on physical fitness. They changed to courses in science and mathematics. The tempo of their lives was stepped up. We were proud of the response to the country's call. Just skipping ahead again, There were more than 700 of them, a higher percentage of the total number of 1,800 graduates than any high school known to us. Every graduate was eligible because of age, since the first class was graduated in 1926. Now, here we have 22 of these boys did not return, which is more than I actually had on the list from before, but I have no other names that are indicated anyway in our records. And finally it says, we dedicate this organ in the honor and everlasting memory of each of them. We dedicate this organ for the ideals of freedom which they so nobly sought to defend. We dedicate it to the continuation of a government after the principles of eternal justice, the unchanging law of God. We dedicate it to America, strong and free. We dedicate it to the cause of peace. Now, just briefly, as an acceptance, and this was accepted by E. Parker McCrum, who was the president of the Board of Education, says, I am pleased that the memorial is a living memorial, a pipe organ. In 1944, the President of the United States appointed a commission known as the American Commission for Living War Memorials. Their general idea has been that the spirit that makes men fight and die for freedom cannot be memorialized by piles of stone and images of metal. A living war memorial is one which memorializes those who served in the war, at the same time promotes the well-being of the community. The pipe organ fulfills all the hopes of the President's Commission. Actually, plans were underway for a memorial organ before the appointment of the Commission. It is pleasing to know that our memorial will be here for years to come. On that note, now we're going to hear something, a little bit more specifically from people who really experienced. I was born in 1943, so my memories aren't that great. Why don't we'll start with women first, if you gentlemen don't mind. Helen, as I said, is filling in at the last moment here, although she did come prepared with some memorabilia. She lived locally, and I'll let her tell her story. What I think would be nice if you could start off with, Helen, is to give us some idea of what Lynbrook Malverne was like living here during the war while others were all fighting.
Well, actually, I lived in Lynbrook. My husband, Tom, and his brother, Ed, both went on active duty from Malverne. But I think it was the same in all the villages on the island. We had the air wardens, patrolling the streets at night, and you'd pull the shades down. And I think everybody had a victory garden. And you learned little tricks. You couldn't get butter, so you would get maybe a quarter of a pound of butter and half a can of evaporated milk, and you would sit there and mix it until you had whipped butter, which later on we would buy, of course. And I remember coming to Malverne on the corner of Cedar Road and Hanson Place, which is property later on we bought and built a house there. And there was a lady there, and we used to go over every one night a week and roll bandages for many, many, many months. That was something that all the young gals seemed to do in those days. And life was just very different. Life sort of stopped, let me say that. We got engaged in October of 42, and he went away in December, and we finally got married in February of 46. So your life really did change. And there were a lot of USOs in the area, and there was a Catholic I put a picture that you might want to look at later on. There was a Catholic USO in Hempstead, and I think you had to have 4 interviews with your parish priest before you were allowed to join the USO, and the servicemen were not allowed to escort you past the door. Even if you were going on the same bus, you'd get in real trouble. And as I said, life was just very, very different. And those are, memories that I have. And waiting for the letters, and you'd wait, and maybe you get 7 or 8 at a time, and then you might not get anything for 10 days. And meantime, you were wondering, what was going on. And I have a lot of information here. I think some of it is very interesting. If you wanted to send a present or a gift, at least this was true in the South Pacific, I would have to write a letter to my husband, my fiancé at the time, and say, I would like to send you so-and-so. And then he would send a request back through the authorities, and I have one here, dated sometime in 45, I think, and it says, request to the postmaster in Lynbrook, New York. Request that one each large photograph of Miss Helen Robinson be sent to me, T.L. Driscoll, Jr., Captain, Air Force. And then at the bottom it says, I certify that the articles requested are necessary and are unprocurable in this area, obviously. And it was just, as I say, a whole different world, His brother, Ed, also went to the service from Malverne and was one of Malverne's heroes. He was in the service, I think, 6 years. He was in Rommel campaign. He was in Sicily, first wave Normandy, and also first into Berlin with Patton. And I have a picture of him here. I also have a Yank, Far East Yank. And here's Ed. He died as a military attaché in Baghdad at 34, leaving 4 children, after getting I don't know how many Purple Hearts and everything else. It was really ironical. My husband came home from the South Pacific in August of 45, and he came home, of course, on a boat, and his General Kenny had said, "Tom, you really ought to stick around. Big things are going to be happening." He said, "No, after 3 years, I just want to go home. I don't want to wait." And while he was at sea, the bomb was dropped, and we were at peace. And this is called Pacific Express, and it was done on the ship. And he has, all the signatures and so forth. So I'll, leave these things for people to look at. They might be interested in later on.
Okay, just 1 or 2 questions. Do you recall we talked about collection of aluminum and metal?
Oh
and
yes,
do you
we had that in
recall
Lynbrook.
how did that work? Did people come door to door, or did they announce to be a?
It seems to me we
drop-off
took
spot?
it someplace, Keith, but I don't remember offhand. But it seems to me we took it someplace.
And you mentioned that you couldn't get butter. At one time, did they give out stamps?
Yeah, you got
For
stamps
butter
for
or-
meat too.
Yeah.
And mayonnaise.
Gasoline?
Oh, gasoline, definitely gasoline. But every time well, not every time, but when I see whipped butter now, I can still see my mom would have me doing, whipping this butter. And it seemed to go on and on forever to get whipped butter out of it.
And shoes were rationed too.
Shoes, you had plastic soles. You didn't have leather soles
Yeah.
in those days.
Only at Geronimo's you got leather soles
So-
and Canzoneras, that's it.
And you couldn't get nylon. I mean, you couldn't get silk stockings. They were the first. Nobody wanted nylon. They thought they were ersatz. That silk looked much nicer. And then after a while, you just couldn't get any silk. And you'd go on a line at lunchtime downtown New York, and you'd stand there your whole lunch hour just waiting to get 1 pair of nylon stockings. And in the summer, you would dye your legs so that it looked like you had stockings on.
Okay, Joe, why don't we move along to you? You flew during the war. Where were you living at that time?
Well, I'll stand up, okay?
If you want. If you don't want comfortable, it's fine.
Gene and I were living in Brooklyn at the time, and I think what is important for you to remember, because I see a few people here with gray hair, so they probably do recall, we had a draft at that time, and my number was right smack in the middle. However, what happened was I went down to 39 Whitehall Street and enlisted in the Air Corps. At that time they didn't have an Air Corps, an Air Force. The Air Corps was part of the Army. So I went down and they gave us an examination, mental and physical, what have you. The expression was they tickle you in the awful funny places to make sure you're all there. And then I had to get a release from the draft board. I went to the draft board and told them I had enlisted, and they said, "My God, you're on the list to go next month." So they got in touch with the 39 Whitehall people, and they decided, okay, they would take me into the Air Force, and I would count for the quota for the following month. Then they sent us to what they call Classification Center. That was in Nashville, Tennessee. And after 6 weeks, you sat down in front of an officer and you told him you wanted to be a pilot or a navigator or a bombardier. Everybody wanted to be a pilot. However, it seemed if you were Jewish, you had to be a navigator. I didn't know anybody that was Jewish that was sent to pilot training, but never mind. They sent us to navigation school, and that was, think about a 13-week course where you had to do groundwork and learn all the stars in the sky and learn all different methods of navigation. After which you were commissioned and sent to a bomb group I was sent out to Boise, Idaho, where I met our crew, and then we went to Tonopah, Nevada, and we became part of a bomb group. At the end of November 1943, we now had a crew. You have 10 men in the crew. You had a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, and a bombardier. You had waist gunners, a radio man, tail gunner, and the bravest guy or the dumbest guy in the world was the ball turret gunner, and we had a nose turret gunner. And we all were in B-24s. In case you don't know what a B-24 looks like, I had this picture painted when I was in England.
There you go.
Yeah. I had this picture painted because this is the exact replica of the one in our group. This was the marking. The tail was white with a horizontal black bar. And I had these put in. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. Anyway, let's put it up here so we... Our outfit left California, Marchfield in California, which is just off of San Francisco. And they said, your next stop is Florida. And our individual plane and the whole group, maybe about 40 bombers, one after another, flew individually from California to Florida. Then they told us we're flying to Trinidad, which is an island down in the Caribbean. And then they told us from there we were going to Brazil. And from Brazil we flew across the Atlantic, and that's where we first found out that we were going to England to be part of the 8th Air Force. We flew across the South Atlantic to part of Africa called Dakar, and then we went up to Marrakech, and from there we went into England, and the whole group now formed. Our outfit was called the 458th at that time, but there was another outfit just about 10 miles away that had gone out and got terribly shot up over a place called Friedrichshafen, which is all the way down on the Swiss border. And they needed replacement crews or navigators, so I was transferred to the 392nd Bomb Group after I'd flown 5 missions. The peculiar part about flying missions, everybody asks you were you scared. The peculiar part about it is you sort of gave yourself up that you were dead, because when we got there they told us the 8th Air Force was flying during the day, the RAF was flying at night, and we were losing 5% every mission, and we had to fly 25 missions, so statistically you were dead. So that's what you did, you just accepted it, and you just went out and you flew, and you weren't scared and you weren't worried about anything. This was it, you were finished. However, that's only a statistic, like the average American man has 2 1/4 children or something like that. There's no such thing as averages in the war. Some people lasted 2 missions, some flew 25 and went home. Incidentally, this was the insignia of our bomb group. It was called the Flying Crusader, and we all had these on our A2 jackets that you see around, these leather jackets. But anyway, basically when we were flying, you just went out, you did your job, and when you came home you figured, okay, you lived another day. But one day in March, well, before I get into that, I have to tell you this. We lived in what they call Quonset huts. These were round-shaped buildings that looked like this. And there were 3 sets of officers in each hut. They had 3 sets which represented 3 crews. And you get to know each and every one pretty good because you're all living there. I guess you would say we're in the same boat. And the worst thing that happened, and I crack up every time I talk about it, twice, all 3 crews went out, and twice we were the only crew to come home. There was a guy in our outfit named Colonel Vickers that compiled what he called the Liberators from Wendling. That's where we were stationed. And I got this book quite recently, and I looked up mission number 76, 29th of April, field order 279, target Berlin. Now, I'm sure you've all been to the movies and you've seen that officers gather in a big room and they pull down the shade or they lift up the shade and you see the map of Europe. We went in there one day. They said, here's the target for today, gentlemen. They raised up the shade. There goes that red line, right out from England, straight across France, right into Germany, right into Berlin. Everybody starts screaming. They sent us out to the plains. We got there. The mission was scrubbed. It came back. Well, you lived another day. You weren't going to Berlin. So, 10 days later, same thing happened. Again, they said we're going to Berlin. We went out. They pulled us back. So we figured this was just a game, except the third time we went. I can't tell it to you any better than here. The group losses on this raid would be the second heaviest ever encountered in its combat history. A total of 8 aircraft and 77 aircrew casualties. Next only to those suffered at Presevation, which I mentioned to you before. On this mission, 18 air crews were briefed, and we lost 8 of the 18, didn't make it home. And down in here it says, Second Lieutenant G.E. Rogers' crew in airplane number 10 was hit by flak, was seen swinging left, and turned back with no shoots being observed. Second Lieutenant R.R. Bishop's crew was last seen after the first fighter attack. No ships, no shooting came out. These were 2 guys that lived with us. It cracks you up just to think about it. They told us we had 25 missions to fly. D-Day was about our 27th because they had increased it to 30. After D-Day, they told us because of the emergency, nobody would be relieved unless we got another crew in. We were just going to fly until the end came. However, after 32 missions, we were all finished flying. They got another crew in and we were finished. But I had a pilot that was a little bit of a nut. Roland Saborin and I went down to see the commanding colonel. And Roland says to him, Colonel, nobody finished flying as the first lieutenant. He should be a captain. I was the second lieutenant. The colonel says, Lieutenant, you're off combat flying. I can't do anything. If you want to be promoted to a captain, go out and fly one more mission. And he says, if you want to be a first lieutenant, you fly another mission. Well, He went and he flew another mission. They made him a captain. But if you read this article, my mother didn't raise any crazy children. I wanted to come home as this. And I didn't care if I was a second lieutenant or first lieutenant. I wasn't getting over there anymore. But I think what was the most interesting thing about the flying part was everybody says, you know, you're a big hero. And I said, yeah, believe it or not, I had 7 medals. But how do you get a medal? This is an air medal. I just lost the ribbon. This is the part that they pin on you, and this is the one that you're supposed to wear. But how did we get an air medal? He came home, and there it was, laying on your cot bed. And I got 4 of these things, and each time it just laid on my bed. One day we went out and got shot up very badly, and I came home. I'd been hit in the shoulder by flak. So they gave me a Purple Heart. The Purple Heart's a beautiful medal. It was actually, it has a picture supposed to be George Washington. He's the one that started it. This medal was actually given to me by the colonel of the base.
I'm just going to hold it up.
Yeah.
Well,
leave it here.
All right.
So they gave us the Purple Heart, and they get a picture of it. And then when we flew 25 missions, they came around and they gave you Distinguished Flying Cross. Now these things have been sitting in a closet in Malverne, I don't know how many years, 39 years I think. I never had the, I don't know what the proper word is, take them out and have them framed and put up and all that. So they've been laying in the closet, and I think this is the first time I've shown them since I've ever had them. Anyway, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the 8th Air Force landing in England. So I decided to take a trip over to the United Kingdom this year instead of going to the Philippines, where I normally would go at that time of the year. And we had a reunion over there, and the remarkable part about it was I couldn't believe that the English people would be so demonstrative. Give you an idea of what happened and the way those people felt. There's a big memorial room in a town called Norwich. If you look at the map, part of England comes out like a belly, and right at that corner is the town of Norwich. And we went in there, and they were showing us all the stuff, and they have all the memorabilia from all the air groups there that were in that area. And afterwards, they said, you have about an hour and a half. I started to roam around the village. I sort of got lost. But I saw 3 buildings, and I wasn't sure which one was the library. So I stopped an elderly gentleman in the street, and I said, sir, which one of these buildings is the library? Well, I have to admit, I don't have an English accent. And I was wearing a sort of badge over here that said 392nd Bomb Group with my name. And he said to me, you're one of the Americans that was over here? He throws his arm around me, practically starts hugging me. He says, if it wasn't for you guys, we'd probably all been dead or part of Germany. And this is what went on wherever we went. Anyway, I don't know what else to tell you about it, except the Army says I was a big hero. They gave me 7 medals. I feel this way. My wife says, take out the garbage. I take out the garbage. The Army says, you go fly. I went and I flew. Nobody ever gave me a medal for taking out the garbage. We're taking my boy to the Little League game. But we did what we had to do, and that's the way it was. And oh yes, I have to tell you about this. You sort of get calloused when you were there. After the second time, we came back, and there were 8 empty beds. A new crew came in, and the guy I got the friendliest with was a guy named Paul Barton from Western West Virginia. I said to him, Paul, you're lucky. You see these Eisenhower jackets? They were very popular at the time. I said, I have an extra one that belonged to one of the other crew members, and I gave it to him, and we became very good friends. After I had finished flying, I stayed there, and I was in charge of what they call the navigator's briefing room. They brief all officers at one time, and then the pilot and co-pilot would go to a separate special briefing, the navigators would go to a special briefing, and the bombardiers would go to a special briefing. And I stayed there from July till December running the navigation room. This guy came in when I was already finished flying. And one day, after I finished briefing everybody, I was on a weekend pass, I went down to London. And like it happened an hour ago, walking on Oxford Street where the shopping center is, all of a sudden I got a real big chill. I didn't know what the hell it was, and I ran back to the base. And you can't exactly run back, you have to take a train because it's about 90 miles from London to Norwich. I went into the operation room. And I said, what happened to the mission today? They said, all the planes came back, and I said, thank God, I was so scared. He says, oh, by the way, they brought back one pilot dead with a piece of flak in his head. I never had the courage, never had the guts to go down to Western West Virginia and see his family. I don't know, maybe one day before I die I'll have the guts to go down there. But this poor guy, I always carried his picture with me. I never forgot him. So I guess that's about all I can tell you about what happened over there. And they say everybody has a picture of their crew, but I was part of 2 crews. So I have the pictures of the 4 officers and some of the enlisted men. And this is a picture, give you an idea of the way the English felt when we came there. It says, welcome home Americans. You can see that afterwards. And the best picture of me ever taken is this one of me with my back turned, wearing that A2 jacket with the planes on the back of it and the bombs on the back of it. And believe it or not, I gave this to a Filipino boy that works for me. And I since found out that the original jackets, if you have them, are worth $2,500.
Get it back.
No, it doesn't do me any good. I sort of outgrown it. But this is the way that we all looked over there if you're lucky enough to survive most of your missions. But I guess, yeah, you see, this proves I was a hero. There's a colonel and a general pinning medals on me. But as I said, I never got a medal for taking out the garbage. But this is exactly the way it was. I I guess that's about all I have to tell you. In case if anybody wants to ask anything after Frank talks, I'll be more than happy to ask you about it, talk to you about it.
Frank, before you get into talking about your efforts during the war, could you maybe start off a little bit about what was happening in Malverne and the surrounding area before you went?
Oh,
And maybe what
all
got
right.
you to go into service at that
As
time?
long as you promise not to tell Rosie what I'm saying.
Okay. This is on
Well,
cable TV, so.
Rose, as many of you know, was born on Ocean Avenue. That's that little street between Merrick Road and Sunrise Highway where the lumber yard is, and Littlefield has a little plant there. And I came from far away. I came from Lynbrook. So one day, John Pellegrino Motors, and I were going to Hempstead, and we're coming up Hempstead Avenue, and there's Rosie standing on the corner waiting for the bus, and Johnny knew her, so we picked her up. So what I'm telling you now is that Rosie was a pickup. So that's the part she doesn't like, and that's the day the fight started. It's been going on. It's what, 52. We're married almost 50 years now. It was 2 years before, and we've been enjoying it ever since. The fights, the making up is the best part. Other than that, I had tried to go into this. I tried to join the service myself. I went down to the Marines, but I was a fat, lazy kid. I went down there. I was about 205 pounds. The sergeant looked at me. He says, "What do you want?" I said, "I'd like to go out the picture." "Go home." The war hadn't broken out yet, but I had made up my mind I was going to join something. I went to the Navy. They weighed me and told me to go home. I went to the Army. They weighed me and checked my eyes and told me to go home. And about 6 months later, the draft just said, "You're fine, come right in." And that's how we started out in the service. But as many of you know, I was in the OSS during World War II. Glenn and I have put together a film that would explain to your satisfaction the things that we did. I think it's time to put the film on. If they watch the film, they can,
right.
yeah.
Now, we have actually videotape. I understand that some of the parts were a little graphic.
Well, that's what I was going to tell you. Because of the secrecy of the work we did, all our files were classified. And why they kept it classified up until only about 4 years ago, I don't know why. Was at this point, who cares anymore what we did, you know? So the archives made many copies of what you're going to see now, and the quality isn't the best. And I think you'll be
Do you
able
want
to.
to say anything about it before we put it on, or is it self-explanatory?
It's self-explanatory, and I narrate a little bit through it too. I did the best I
So,
could.
so just shift towards the, I don't know if we may have to turn the light there. Let me just find play on here.
That's General Donovan. That's the Italians being the first, and were truly an experimental unit, and the results were fine, so they formed the French, Greek, Yugoslav, Norwegian, German, and other groups. These are some of the men who partook in the missions of the OSS. These men jumped behind the lines. This is Carl LaDolce. He and Aldo Riccardi were tried and convicted in absentia for the murder of Bob Houlihan. If ever they return to Italy, they have life imprisonment waiting for them. These men organized guerrilla bands behind the lines. They supplied them and trained them and led them into battle. Our work was mostly to disrupt the communication lines, the supply lines, and shoot up their rest camps many miles behind the action, the front line action. And it did a lot to harass the enemy, not let them rest. And it did help bring the war to a sooner conclusion than anticipated. Here is a picture of we buried 3 of our boys here in Corsica. That little sign says, "Here lie 3 American soldiers who died for the liberation of Corsica, one of them being Rocco Grasso from Babylon, Long Island. We had time for a little fun. That's Chicago Mike. That's Carl again. A lot of these fellas were born in Italy and were only in this country a few years before the war broke out. And when they were asked to go back there and do this kind of work, it was a big decision for them to make because many of them had brothers and uncles and cousins and possibly their own fathers they might face in battle. So I give them a lot of credit. Myself, I was only 21 years old. Many of us were 21. It was just a big adventure to us.
Members of the operational groups in the Mediterranean theater are located at Caserta, Italy. Company A, at present the only active unit, is operating solely in Italy, with its headquarters at Siena. For the conduct of effective guerrilla warfare in enemy-occupied territory, organized native resistance groups are indispensable. The first job of Company A, therefore, was to drop food and supplies into the partisans who are trapped in northern Italy. December 2nd, 1944, OG headquarters in Siena received a directive from Allied armies in Italy for men to operate with a given group of partisans behind enemy lines. Men selected for the job were members of the Cayuga team, which was called in for a briefing session by Captain Albert R. Materazzi. Team, representative of OG activity in Italy, is composed of volunteers from the U.S. Army, recruited particularly for their foreign language speaking abilities. Trained by OSS as specialists in guerrilla warfare, they are infiltrated or parachuted behind the lines, where their job is to organize, equip, lead and fight with the partisan resistance groups. The fact alone that American soldiers in American uniforms, speaking the native language, come to aid the people in their fight against the enemy has a tremendous morale effect among these native groups. General is to exploit to the limit the possibilities of waging war behind enemy lines, but no specific operations can be planned until the men actually drop into the region and study the situation at first hand.
Towards the end of March in 1944, this group parachuted behind the lines. Their mission was to blow up a tunnel at the Air Corps Unfortunately, they were captured the next day after their landing. In capturing our men behind the lines, we were to be treated as prisoners of war because we were in uniform, we were not spies. General Anton Dassler, on the orders from the commander of the Führer, actually, from Hitler down through Kesselring to the field commanders, was ordered to execute anyone who was captured behind the lines. After doing so, having these men executed, after the war, Dassler was the first war criminal to be tried at the Nuremberg trials.
To further establish that the capture of the Americans was made known to 75th Corps, there will be evidence that about under his command. On Sunday, the 26th of March, at about 0700 hours, the 15 American soldiers were brought to a place called Punta Bianca, which is slightly south of the Spezia. They were shot in two groups, executed by a firing squad commanded by Captain Rayfeld. Later they were taken and placed in the grave, which was not far away, that had been prepared by Lieutenant Bolzer. They were never tried. They were never brought before any court or given any hearing. In the course of this trial, references will be made to what is called the Führerbefehl. That means Order of the Führer. In other words, the Order of Adolf Hitler. I think
of their government or commanders. In the law for the last 100 years in the Army, when a superior gives an order, it is expected that it be carried out. And it is presumed that either this superior authority or the court-martial will protect any person who obeys an order not obviously illegal and unlawful upon his face.
John Dossler, as president of this commission,
als Präsident dieser Kommission,
it is my duty to inform you
ist es meine Pflicht, Sie zu unterrichten,
that the commission in closed session
dass die Kommission in geschlossener Sitzung
and upon secret written ballot
und auf ein geheimes, schriftliches Urteil hin
at least 2/3 of all of the members of the commission concurring
mit zumindest
finds you
findet sie
of the specification and of the charge
in Bezug auf die Einzelheiten und in Bezug auf die Anklage
guilty,
schuldig,
to be shot to death by musket.
Erschossen zu werden.
So, the commission
Finally freed of Nazi terror, Europe's hatred erupts against its former conquerors, their own countrymen who served the Nazis. The shaved heads of women become a mark of shame all over Europe. Resistance groups pitilessly hunt out those who only yesterday were hunting them. The world is shocked by the sight of Mussolini strung up like a carcass in Milan. Military justice is orderly, but swift. To those who committed brutalities against helpless Allied prisoners of war, the courts show little mercy. Responsible for executing 13 American prisoners without trial, General Anton Dossler becomes the first high-ranking German officer to face a post-war firing squad.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand for the press?
Mark's time.
Present. Ho!
Please be seated. I'd like to welcome you all here today, commemorating the ceremony commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Office of Strategic Services and dedicating this OSS memorial. Especially would like to welcome former directors Helms and Colby and Mrs. Casey and all of the veterans of the OSS who are here with us today. Ambassador Dick Walters once observed that Americans have always had an ambivalent attitude about intelligence. When they feel threatened, they want a lot of it, and when they don't, they tend to regard the whole thing as somewhat immoral. The trouble is, without good intelligence, you won't know when you'll need it. You won't see the threat coming. 6 months ago, we gathered here to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, an attack which caught us by surprise, claimed some 3,000 American lives, and drew our country into the largest.
These are the citations that we received. This one's from General Clark.
That
was it.
Have lights, please, someone in the back?
If anyone wants to take a look at it later. Also, in our outfit we had a commercial artist. Every time anything happened, he would put it down in cartoons, so you might find them interesting. Whatever.
Yeah. Are you in here?
Yeah.
Or where's you?
I want you to know that this cartoonist, Vince Marcone, loved me like a brother. Wait till you see how he made me look. Imagine what he would make me look like if he didn't like me. There we go. Well, we were stationed in Il Rus, Corsica, the hotel. We took over hotels, so we were nice and comfortable. In the middle. That's me in the middle. So this Mr. LaRusso owned the hotel, and he had about 30-odd chickens. And every morning he would count the chickens. One of the chickens only had one leg, and we called it Hopalong Cassidy. As he counts, every time he got to that chicken, he stopped counting. So we told everybody, when you steal chickens, make sure you don't take Hopper. So we're up at the Villa Radio Shack, and Chicago Mike's turn to go get the chickens, and who shows up with the one-legged chicken? So we got caught. And the officer come over there, and the cartoon shows the three of us standing there with feathers behind us. What chicken? Oh, he was quite an artist, this fellow. He's There's one in particular here that's, every time I see it I could cry. This fella here, Arthur Bruno. No matter how Rommel did it, or Montgomery did it, or Patton, he always had a better way. So they made him Sir Arthur Bruno, Field Marshal Sir Arthur Bruno. And then, this is the comical part of it. It's much more fun talking about these things than anything else. This guy, John Perna, he was born over in Italy. He had, in fact, when we took over one of those small islands between Corsica and Italy, there's the island of Elba you all know about, and there's many small ones. Each one of those islands at one time or another was a kingdom for someone. Each one had a castle. But in later years they became penal colonies for Italy. So we're on this island, we're going up to the building and the troops are coming down. The Italians had already surrendered at this point. And his uncle is one of the men coming down there and they're crying and hugging and kissing. But he was a barber. He was always saying, I don't belong here. Once he got on the outfit, he had second thoughts about it. He says, so I'm going to go over the hill. So the colonel's over here talking to his orderly, and he says, Marcellese, keep an eye on Perna there. He says, I'm no good for this outfit. Why don't they throw me out? I used to be a barber. I never did work like this. When I get to Italy, I'm going to hide in the mountains. That major is crazy. Why don't they do me a favor and throw me out? So we can take a look at these.
What else do we have here? Is that you can hold up or tell us about?
Well, those are the fellas that were in that mission at...
How much weight did you lose after you got me?
Well, I'll tell you. You know what happened? When I went in, I was about 195 when I went in, and after basic training, I was down to about 180, 182. When we went over there, my first mission I went on was into Corsica. It was supposed to be a 9-day mission. We took supplies for about 14 days, and we wound up being about 5 months before the rest of the journeys. And we ran out of our food, and it was the fig season. And I love figs. And I'm telling you, so I love them so much, and not to dramatize this thing, I happened to, the trees were tremendous. The figs were like that, long white ones, long black ones. You must have seen them, Joey. So I'm up in this tree, tremendous tree, maybe about 35 foot up there, eating one after another. A German convoy goes by right under the road. And I'm just sitting there, and I never stopped eating. Well, I lost about 25 pounds there. Everybody thought I was dying. My cheeks went in. I still eat figs.
Right, does anybody have any questions to our panel?
Keith, I'd like to just read this,
Sure.
I forgot. We had a newspaper over there. It was called the Stars and Stripes, the daily newspaper, U.S. Armed Forces. And I used to send them home to Gene whenever I flew a mission or something would happen. And this one is the day after D-Day. And the reason I brought this is because in here, you can see it sort of falling apart. This is dated Wednesday, June the 7th, 1944. Do you want it, or should I keep it? It's up to you.
Would like to buy it?
Yeah, okay. What it has here is Eisenhower's order of the day, which I think is very interesting. The following order of the day was issued yesterday by General Eisenhower to each individual of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Quote, soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade towards which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayer of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers-in-arms on the other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940 to 41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. The full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill of battle, we accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us beseech the blessings of Almighty God upon this great, noble undertaking. And I have to tell you, D-Day was a big surprise to everybody except those that flew it. We got up at 2 o'clock in the morning. We were due over the coast of France at 6 o'clock. We got in our planes, we formed a formation, we went over there. There was cloud cover all the way. We turned around and came back and never dropped one bomb. That was my experience with D-Day. Not one bomb, the whole group came back. And the reason for it was we were afraid that we were just a little off, we'd be bombing our own guys. But I just thought, here, you can have it, Keith, but you gotta paste it together.
Saying what you say brings to mind what happened to me for D-Day. About four or 5 weeks prior to D-Day, they sent 45 of us down to Sicily for glider training. And for 2 weeks, we took glider training. It was great and a lot of fun, you know, no motor, just shushing through the sky. Then, after the 3rd week there, they made a whole pile out of the gliders. They burnt them all up, never told us anything. And then 3 days later was D-Day. And evidently they had something planned for us to go D-Day, but God says, God bless you kids. We changed your plans and it never came to. I did want to explain to you about Carl LaDolce. I had pointed him out there. Carl and I, while we were taking our training in the States, we were roommates. And he was always a quiet fellow, always kept to himself. In fact, his best friend was his guitar. And he was a radio man. When we got overseas, I saw very little of him. In fact, the last time I saw him, he was going on this mission with Aldo Accardi, Bob Houlihan, and 4 others, he being the radio man. And I never saw him again. After the war, I'm discharged. I pick up the paper at Solomon's there, or I think it was still Katz at the time, and there's Carl LaDolce on the front page with Aldo Accardi. What had happened, the story went that this group, this Major Houlihan was, wasn't Italian, as you can tell by the name. He didn't speak Italian. Well, I'll tell you another story about a pharaoh who was in the group. And what had happened was all the partisans that fought with us in northern Italy, they were communists. They were older, wiser than we. We were trained to do what we were doing. We did that well, but not thinking about next year, not 2 years from now. Evidently, they're planning down the road because the supplies that we were dropping them were disappearing. And Houlihan was sent in. He was the only one who knew what the mission was all about. The other men hadn't been briefed at all. So they were sent in to find out what was happening to those supplies. So they got there and nothing was happening mission-wise. No operations, no bridges being blown, no tunnels being blown. So Riccardo Montalban, like the actor, the 3rd, his name was, he was in charge of this group. And he said to Accardi being a short fellow, he was a captain, he wanted to command the whole group there. They planned to bump off Houlihan, and Accardi would be the commanding officer. Whatever the plan was, they tried, it was in the papers, they tried to kill him by poisoning his food, but he wasn't dying fast enough. So they had to draw lots as to who was going to do the shooting, and the story says that Carl drew the lot to do the shooting. So the only reason the story came out is one of the partisans who was involved wanted absolution from the church, and the priest told him the only way you're going to get absolution is to confess the crime, and that's how it all came about. So as a result of all that, they were